What's up, everybody? So basically, I kind of want to run it this way and do notes this way and kind of do lectures, quote unquote, at home. So that way we can really maximize our time together when we're in class. So that way we can really spend our time reviewing certain information or doing the worksheets or discussions or something along those lines. So, first things first, here's our objective. That's all good. All right, so I'm going to have you take a minute here and answer the question that's going to pop up on the screen. Just see, name as many major psych figures from the summer packet and anything about them. All right, and now, kind of the same thing, you're going to get a question here. So, based on your prior knowledge, and obviously this is going to help from the summer packet, create your own definition of psychology. So think about, what does it mean? What do psychologists study? What do you associate with psychology? I want you to create your own definition. All right, so the definition that we are going to use is psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. All right, and to quickly break that down, obviously scientific study using research methods to investigate compelling questions, either learn more or solve existing problems. But the scientific piece is super, super, super important and is key to this whole thing. Oftentimes psychology can be called a soft science. I would push back against that. I think there's a significant amount of science and scientific method and analytics and everything that's used within psychology to make it much more scientific and trying to take away some of the things that would make it not scientific. So it ends up being a much heavier science or math course at times than I think people always realize. And we're going to obviously talk about that with this unit in the research methods portion. When we get into biology, when we look at how do we measure and grade intelligence, there's the studies behind and mental health orders and the treatment and the science behind treatments. So very much a science of unto itself. And then behavior, what people do, their actions, mental processes, what people think, feel, what they dream, all that good fun stuff. So, where does psychology come from? Well, it really draws its origins from the ancient philosophers. So Confucius, Socrates, Aristotle, Descartes, Sir Francis Bacon, John Locke. Hopefully those names are familiar. Hopefully all of them, or at least a few of them, should be familiar to all of you. But they were all, and obviously Locke and Bacon, even Descartes, are a bit more, or significantly more modern than the first three there. But they were all philosophers, and they would philosophize either about government or people or literally everything. So they would think about and kind of give those philosophical thought experiments on human behaviors or actions. They tried to find ways to explain why people acted the way that they did. And some of the things now you would look back and they talk about like the four elements. So like blood and bile and all that, yellow bile, black bile, like, you'd be like, what is going on? So these individuals, and not only these six, but these are some of the guys that help start psychological discussion, but they definitely are not really followed at this point. And philosophy is different. So obviously if you guys are going to go to college here and probably take a philosophy 101, and Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, like those, especially those three will be studied, and they're still studied and learned from, but not in a psychological sense, still in a philosophical sense. So we've definitely moved on from some of their, or all of their psychological beliefs. Where psychology looks to as the birth of psychology and kind of the founder is going to be this guy here, Wilhelm Vunt, and he is known as the father of psychology. So obviously you see in the mid 1800s, he and two students at the University of Leipzig in Germany created the first psychological lab in which psychological experiments were conducted. So he truly made it into a science, and he made it into something that could be studied by creating a psych lab and trying to then run experiments. And he was seeking to measure the atoms of the mind. Wundt's goal really was to establish psychology as a science separate from philosophy and biology. And when you think about psychology, it is kind of a blend of those two things because it's about the brain, and that can get very philosophical very fast. But then obviously so much of what we're going to do is grounded in the actual biology of the brain and the body. So, he wanted to create it separate from those things. And by doing that, it really is that blend, but it's its own thing. It's not just a different branch of philosophy, or it's not a branch of biology. It's a blend of both. It's a standalone topic. So that's kind of what he set out to do and really helped found. So he created an experimental apparatus designed to test hearing and then the actual processing of that hearing. So you see a little bit more of the nitty gritty below, but basically it was about, when do you sense that sound, and then the perception of, oh, now I just heard it. And that's what he was looking to study. The difference of just your basic sensation and then the perception of, oh, I just heard that sound. So that's where at the bottom there, subjects were encouraged to think objectively and think introspectively to analyze their own thoughts of, I just heard that sound. And he was going to measure the difference that it took, and that would start to get into it. You don't really need to know the full nitty gritty. It's fine. But with Vunt and following Vunt, that's where early schools of psychology begin to emerge. Structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism. Structuralists basically believe that everything can be broken down into its basic underlying structures, just trying to take an emotion or a behavior and break it down to the most basic reasons as to why. And we'll explain more in the following slides. Functionalists, everything was just done as a function, not to use the same word, but function to survive. Your thoughts and really your actions were done because of the world around you. Behaviorists didn't believe in either of those things, because behaviorists believe I can't see into someone's mind. No matter what, you can't see into someone's mind. So behaviorists only cared about observable behavior, because at the end of the day, maybe, right, intentions don't really matter. It's all about behavior, and that's what behaviorists focused on. So, Edward Titchener, this is who you want to associate with structuralism. So Titchener, structuralism. He was the one that founded the perspective. And he believed that every experience could be broken down into introspective emotions and sensations. Relied on introspection and discussion about the experience to then draw some conclusions about behavior or feelings or whatever it may be. Now, hopefully you caught this on the question from the other slide, but, that's going to be a big issue. Using introspection is an issue when you're trying to be scientific, when you're trying to be accurate, right? Because introspection, you're relying on someone to tell you their thoughts and feelings and then draw conclusions from that. Well, you can't do that because, one, everyone is different. So person A's thoughts, feelings, and actions in the situation is going to be different from B, C, D, and E, and F. And person A could just be lying, right? Because you don't actually know. So structuralism is eventually forgotten about because it's too subjective, it's too inconsistent. And if the whole point of creating this field as a science, you need to have repeatable data and valid data and reliable data, and introspection does not allow those things to happen. Next is William James and functionalism. So he's influenced a lot by Darwin, so, evolutionary theory, survival of the fittest, all those types of things. So for James, his entire focus wasn't about breaking things down to understand. James's focus was how our conscious thought helps us function as a person in society, but really about survival. So how people's, you know, why we do what we do, like the thoughts behind something is, how does this help me function within the group that I'm in? But then how does this help me survive as an individual? Right? So he didn't really care about breaking things down to understand them. He wanted to get to what is the function of this thought? What is the function of this behavior? So you eat to survive, right? And that's where, again, the tie to Darwin, right? Many of our behaviors were adaptive, and there was evolutionary reasons for them. So we change with the times in order to adapt to our current time in order to survive. And there's a really cool kind of fun fact. So James admitted Mary Calkins into his Harvard program in 1890. That's a big deal because women were not allowed to just like do things at that point in time. So Harvard actually denied her degree, but she continued to push through, and James helped work with her and all those things. But even though she was initially denied her degree from Harvard, Calkins kept working and kept pushing, and eventually went on to become the first female president of the American Psychological Association. So, snaps to her, good stuff, but just a cool fun fact. Another reaction to structuralism, just like William James and functionalism, Max Vertheimer here was another German psychologist, and he developed the Gestalt theory. And for him, he believed that sensation and perception could not be broken down into individual parts. You needed to look at the whole thing. Thoughts, feelings, actions, behaviors. Like you have to break down. You can't break those things down. They all work together in order to create the behavior or the action. So, and Gestalt just means organized whole in Dutch. We won't really get into Freud because he's not the most important at this specific point in time, but just know Freud's an interesting man. Behaviorism, John Watson, behaviorism, and he was all about conscious versus unconscious. And basically, he thought that was the issue. Like, what is conscious thought? What is unconscious thought? How do you measure that? Especially at that point, you really can't, right? There's a problem. So for him, psychology is all about the study of observable behavior, because that's what I know happened. I don't have to, it doesn't matter why someone did something, just that they did it. We're going to really come back to Watson when we talk about conditioning. So in the learning unit, poor little Albert, and then counter conditioning as well. So we're going to come back to him at a later unit. So in the final 2 minutes here, structuralism, functionalism, Gestalt, behaviorism. Think about, like, how do we understand a donut? Do we think about each individual ingredient, or do we think about the final product, or how does it work? Here's how it works. So, breaking it down. Vunt, right? We must study the donut scientifically and objectively. We must think objectively about our own reaction to the donut. Well, that can't be a science because I love donuts, but maybe someone else doesn't love donuts. So, it's not going to work. Titchener, to fully understand the experience of the donut, we must deconstruct the donut and analyze the contribution of each ingredient. So to understand a donut, we need to understand the amount of sugar and flour and sugar and more sugar. And that's how we really understand the donut. William James, functionalism. People evolve to love donuts because they want to survive. And I get it. Eat donuts and live. Wertheimer, the donut can only be fully understood in its full and final form. So the amount of ingredients doesn't matter. It's only about eating it. Freud, this is what I was saying, he's kind of a weird dude. The donut you select reflects your unconscious sexual desires. So next time you guys go to Dunkin' Donuts, have fun judging everyone. Figure that one out. And lastly, Watson, people can be conditioned to dislike donuts if we pair their consumption with aversive stimulus. So I can make all of you hate your favorite food if I want to. We'll come together and watch the final kind of intro to Crash Course there. But I'm going to leave you guys with this question. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in class.